It's time once again to step out, step up, and step into the Coming Out Lounge, a safe space to be you and your truth with coming out coach Rick Clemens. Rick's expertise in the coming out process has helped hundreds of men and women step out of the closet to live authentically as gays and lesbians. Freeing you from the feelings of guilt and shame, Rick's heart-centered approach is loaded with bankable advice and take action tips for living powerfully on the other side of the closet door. Each week, the Coming Out Lounge brings you heartwarming coming out stories, thought-provoking insights, and diverse perspectives for living out and proud. Pull up a chair and spend an inspiring hour in the Coming Out Lounge, stepping out, stepping up, and stepping into living your truth. Here's the host of your show, Coming Out Coach Rick Clemens.
And here we are. It's a day where we're going to talk a little serious, but we're also going to open up and explore what is it like? What is it like when you're one of 12 who gets gunned down in a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado? What does it feel like when you're facing the wrath of Hurricane Isaac and not sure what you might wake up to? What does it feel like to know that your son was taken down by a gunman at the Empire State Building? And how do you deal with stepping away from your true self that you thought was true to step into a new world of becoming authentically you when you discover that, yes, I am a gay man or a lesbian woman? Welcome to the Coming Out Lounge. I'm Coming Out Coach Rick, and I don't want this show to be a downer. In fact, I want it to be a joyous celebration of really delving in and discovering how do we navigate the journeys and the roads when we have to face grief or loss, whether it's through losing someone we truly care about, whether it's breaking up in a relationship, or whether it is a devastating national disaster. How do we go through these emotions and really step through this in a healthy, comforting, supportive way with ourselves and others? And today I've got a really special guest. He's been a friend of mine for a couple of years, and he actually was my trainer as I went through the coaching program at the Institute of Professional Excellence of Coaching. He's a man who has navigated his own journey through grief and loss, through discovering who he was at his core, and also taking the moments and the time and the deep explorations to say, this is what I want to be. And in a few minutes, I'm going to ask him to join me as we go and discover how can you, each and every one of you, take the power of who you are when it comes to anything that shows up as a major loss in your life, a little loss in your life, and go through the grieving process and come out the other side stronger and more in tune and in touch with yourself. So as we go through the show today, again, if there's anything you would like to share with someone, the Twitter is @Rick Clemens, and the hashtags are CO Lounge and hashtag #Coming Out Lounge. And I just want to go ahead and at this point bring my really good friend, colleague, and a guy I have a huge amount of admiration for, Keith Miller. Hi, Keith. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Rick. It's great to be on the show with you, and the admiration is mutual.
Well, I know. We both dress so fine that's all we can do is admire each other. So, but seriously, Keith, you know, we've had many conversations. We're very close and as colleagues and as friends. And I have to say, what you do as a grief and loss coach, and I know that's not all you do, just like me, I'm not just a coming out coach, but you really have this gentle spirit that enables people to really step into the midst of that big moment in life and help them navigate through it. So I'm curious, and I know each person's different, but is there something that's a common starting point when you step into work with an individual to help them, you know, get through grief or overcome a loss?
Well, I think that one of the common starting points is, you know, for people to really start expressing themselves. When people have a loss, most people tend to isolate and remove themselves and wait for time to pass. And it's not the passing of time that helps us gain the gifts from our loss, but it's what we do with our time. Are we going to be proactive? And what is the meaning that we're going to make out of that loss that really is going to dictate the outcomes of our loss?
Absolutely. And, again, even through the intro, I kind of brought up several scenarios, but I want to make sure that as people are listening to their live or as they download the podcast later, that when we talk about loss, it doesn't necessarily have to be some humongous tragedy.
Not at all. In fact, I really like that you said that, the show's not a downer. And, it's something that loss is something that we all experience. We actually experience moments of loss with every out-breath. Mm-hmm. That moment, every moment's gone. And so it's something that we collectively experience. And as our dreams change or our relationships change, we're always experiencing loss, which also, can offer a new opportunity and a learning experience. But so many of us have, not learned at all how to navigate loss. All we've really experienced of how to deal with it is that which was modeled to us by our parents. And that becomes our system for dealing with loss. And some people have, a very stoic way of being, kind of suck it up. And some people are, highly expressive. So when we get more conscious about loss and grief, when we are grieving these moments in our lives, we have this opportunity to say, how could I really come up with a system that feels genuine, organic, and comfortable for me to really honor that and that I no longer have.
Well, yeah, and I love how you just described this genuine and organic way, because I think oftentimes, and again, depending on our background and, our socialization by parents or friends or teachers, whatever it may be, we often try to push through instead of being with many things in life, and grief and loss is one of those things. And I feel that, through my own coming out experience, oftentimes I found myself pushing through it and not honoring the fact that there was this piece of Rick that I was losing, a piece of me that was how I had self-identified, that I needed to honor that I was losing it, but in a way of I was allowing it to be let go in a beautiful manner and allowing the grief to come forward that goodbye, Rick, who you knew, and welcome to the beautiful new Rick that you're inviting to finally come take center stage.
Exactly. And what I love about that, Rick, is that can only really happen when we start looking at how is this loss also a gift. It's almost like when we look at the yin-yang of life, one side is light and one side is dark. So for many people, they look at the light side as, all the joy of life and the dark side of all the pains. So when you look at this collectively, that represents life. So if we resist and say that loss or pain or trauma should not happen, then we're in a state of resistance. And we're going to exacerbate that pain. When we bring our attention to that it's normal to have loss, pain, trauma in life, and that within that loss is also a tremendous gift, we're actually growing and expanding, that's when we can see how life is unfolding in our best interest and start noticing how has this assisted me in my life, and who am I now?
Absolutely.
Just like you said, yeah.
I think it's the who am I now that so many of us miss, and I've watched my own journey over the last, going over 3 years, coming into my own as a coach. And it's been very interesting to see the who am I show up in many different facets in many different ways as I've flexed and molded and morphed. But in each of those, as I call it, the yoga positions of life, I have fine-tuned the muscle to begin to realize that it's okay to grieve what's going past and what's being let go, but it doesn't have to be this heart-wrenching, throw it down. It's just allowing the acknowledgement that I'm letting go. And there might be a little bit of grief to it. There may not be, but I allow for that thought to show up. What is it I may have to grieve? And we've got a couple of minutes before we go to break, but I think this is one of those things I'd really like to talk about really deeply is, what does it mean to grieve? And how do we do it? So before we go to break, what does grief really mean to you, Keith?
Well, we experience grief when we have, relationships, dreams, ideals, change in health, when something has changed and it's really not the way that we want it to be. So we experience this pain of the change, and it's what's really happening is that something that's really important to us is no longer.
That's a perfect way to take us to break. I think it's the beautiful when there's the change and something shows that up that is no longer. And I want to pick up right there when we come back, when we talk about what is grief, what is change, and how do we begin to navigate through it on our way to truly coming out into our own beautiful story.
Beautiful.
Back.
You've been listening to The Coming Out Lounge, a safe space to be you and your truth with coming out coach Rick Clemens. We'll be right back after these messages.
I look into the window of my mind.
Is there more living for you to do? Yes. Start living inspired. Be here for Living Inspired with Tricia Goyer, Thursday afternoons at 4, 3 p.m. Central on TogiNet.com. Tricia will dig deep into topics that matter most to women, inspiring women to make a change in their own lives and to make a difference in the world, and maybe even deep within their own hearts. Tricia is a wife, mom, speaker, family expert, and author of 24 books. For more information on Tricia and Living Inspired, go to her website, TriciaGoyer.com. That's TriciaGoyer.com. Tricia's vision is to be the voice of hope and possibility for women of all ages. Her intention is to serve ordinary women by encouraging extraordinary things with God's help. Tricia expresses real life, real hope for real women. Is there more living for you to do? Yes. Start living inspired. Living Inspired with Tricia Goyer. Thursday afternoons at 4, 3 p.m. Central on TogiNet.com.
Lori Hurley, the social networking navigator, helps you overcome your overwhelm online and make social media easy. Every week, she shares the latest and greatest about social networking and welcomes industry experts and end users of different social media platforms to share their experiences moving their business forward online. Whether you are a Facebook fanatic or a lover of LinkedIn, Lori has you covered on all angles of social media, including Twitter, YouTube, blogging, Google+, and more. Lori shares her knowledge and love of educating others on all things social media with relevant material, engaging guests, and hot tips and techniques to help you soar down the social media highway. Join her every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time for the Social Networking News Hour here on the Woohoo Radio Network.
Welcome back to the Coming Out Lounge with your host, Rick Clemens.
And we are back, and I'm talking with my very good friend and professional coach, Keith Miller, who is a grief and loss coach. And before the break, we had been talking about how grief is really a piece of just when change shows up. And I want to continue that dialogue because I think in society as we are right now, change is truly inevitable. It is a part of what we are living and breathing every day. And I don't know that any of us are truly making room to allow that grief and loss to be managed. So, Keith, what would be some tips and tricks you would say, and I hate saying trick because I don't think there's any trick to it, but for really starting to manage pieces of loss and grief living in the world we do today?
Well, I think that's a great question, Rick. You know, I think that when we have loss in our life, we don't know what to do with it. You know, it's interesting as a society, we've not been trained, something we universally experience, and none of us have been trained or had a conscious conversation about what do you do, how do you do it. So we're all winging it.
Yeah.
And we kind of seemingly wing it well, but most people, they tend to really isolate, and they don't communicate. They feel like the party pooper, and others don't want to be around me. We have pretty painful thoughts about ourselves, and we feel victimized, and how could God have done this to us? And we start making meaning out of it, and we start having this victim energy. So when we work with somebody else and start creating, how could I really consciously go through grief? How could I lean into this instead of managing it, such as managing it by numbing out, by isolating, or drinking, or taking drugs, or by doing things that aren't in our best interest, that are self-sabotaging. So how could I actually face grief head on and actually grow from this experience? So one of the that would be the first step, would be to actually work with somebody and say, listen, I'm experiencing grief. And, what's interesting, Rick, is since we don't have systems to deal with it, it tends to have an accumulative effect. We kind of throw it over our shoulder, and our loss and grief and the pain of that ends up in what I call our red flyer wagon, and we keep towing it through life. And so sometimes even just a small event like a shift in a job or something like that could unveil a tremendous amount of stored up grief and energy around it.
Well, and I think this is really and I love the metaphor you use about the red flyer wagon that we just keep towing through life.
Yeah.
But what I heard you say quite clearly was truly admitting we are experiencing grief or loss.
Yeah.
And coming from a place of no shame or guilt around, yes, I'm in grief, I'm experiencing loss, because the moment we, at least from my perspective, embrace the shame and guilt around it, we might as well just pick the rug up and sweep it under the carpet.
Exactly. Can I share a story with you, Rick?
Absolutely.
So I've been coaching for 10 years, and I started off as a coach that worked in medical resiliency, which was the loss of health. And while I was coaching, I was also in a relationship that suddenly ended. And when that relationship ended, all this accumulation of grief bubbled up for me. During the AIDS epidemic, which is still going on, I'd lost over 40 friends in my life. And all of it came up, and I realized there has to be a different way. And I started working with a coach and dealing with my grief. And it actually really transformed my life. All of us have this accumulation, and I didn't even realize that pulling that red flyer, you get so used to it, you don't even realize that you're pulling it until you start noticing life is lighter. So the experience that I had is that when I first went to my coach, I had about 20% engagement to life and 80% energy that felt victimized. And within a few sessions of getting conscious and started moving through the grief, I had 80% engagement to life and 20% residual grief that I could deal with. And I was really quite shocked. So this comes through, I know grief well. We, as gay and lesbian individuals, we experience a lot of grief in the coming out process.
Absolutely.
And societal norms. How do we do that, and what are we doing with that energy?
Well, and this is interesting too, because as gays and lesbians, if we allow the little red flyer wagon to continue to follow us, it not only happens through the coming out process, but if we're not conscious to it, it continues through our integration into the gay and lesbian community. If we're not accepted, if we don't have the perfect pecs, if we don't drive the perfect car, if we don't run with the perfect crowd, then we experience another layer of grief and loss of not being accepted within our own community, and we just put another, package in the wagon to be hauled behind us.
Exactly. So you are absolutely correct. The first step is to bring our attention to that there's another way.
Yeah.
And to try something different. It's like if we keep putting the vanilla cake mix into the oven, you're going to get a vanilla cake. So if we're looking for different results, we have to throw in chocolate sprinkles. So by saying, I'm in grief and there's a different way rather than just suck it up,
right,
is to start working with somebody and start expressing yourself.
Right. And I want to make sure the listeners really get that when you say something like suck it up, it's not like get over it. It's like, let's go do something. Let's get in action, because once you get in action, there's no reason to sit lamely by in the middle of the road of life.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's actually, instead of leaning back and waiting for time to pass,
yep,
it's leaning forward and saying, let me try a different way. And what a coach can help somebody do in the navigation of grief is not only get those thoughts out of your mind, which kind of like, it's like defragging it, it frees up disk space, that a coach actually helps you be in the present moment. Very often we're in guilt and remorse, especially when we're experiencing grief, or we're in anxiety into the future. A coach actually helps you release and start forgiving yourself and forgiving others.
Yeah.
I help my clients. This is my express method that I use with clients. Is to look at what is the energetic perspectives that I have, and what is a different perspective that I can have about this loss and grief.
Absolutely. And this really shows up, too, even in the simplest things. And I want you to finish your thought, but the simplest things, even in losing weight, we have to make room for the acknowledgement that there's something being lost. Yes, there's physical pounds, but there's also a numbness that many of us who have had the battle of the bulge, we suddenly have become numb to, yeah, this is where I live with the battle of the bulge. But then when we allow the release and the joy of I'm changing and I need to let go of the perception that battle of the bulge is okay for that person, if that's their belief, then once again, we go through and we make this release a whole part of actually stepping into new being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what you say is very accurate. Whatever you believe will be your reality. Mm-hmm. And we do, when we have changes in our life, even if it's reducing your weight, there's the loss of who I was.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And now who am I, and what do I have to face in being, whether that be somebody at a reduced weight, or now single, or a widow, or somebody who has HIV, or somebody who, whatever that change is, we're facing my new who am I, and how do I deal with that?
Well, I think this is an interesting juncture we get to, because the who is something that is really powerful, but the who is also the thing through this grief process and change process and losing something, that if the who comes up too strongly, it can freeze us, because the who can get focused very quickly on the future. And then all it thinks about is, well, who am I going to be as a gay man? Who am I going to be as a person that's now 50 pounds lighter? Who am I going to be as a single person instead of a divorced person? And suddenly the change, the grief and everything will cause us to just literally stop, climb in the little red flyer wagon, and stay.
That's right.
And, we're going to be going to break again in just a couple of minutes here. But I think this is a beautiful place to really, segue into how do we deal with ourselves in loss, and how do we deal with someone else that we see going through these kinds of losses, so that the little red flyer doesn't take over.
Rick, you make a great point, because statistically in June of 2006, Time Magazine did an article on grief and loss, and in that article they stated that without awareness, so in other words, just waiting for time to go by, with a profound loss, which is death or divorce,
right,
that people take 5 to 8 years. 5 to 8 years. And in my experience over this last decade of working with individuals in loss, that with consciousness and coaching and becoming aware and start looking at a different perspective, clients are navigating through it in months, which is what a gift to be able to bring back years of your life.
Absolutely. And when we return, that's what we're going to talk about, is how powerful moving through, getting past can be when you allow it to take nanoseconds as opposed to 5 to 8 years. When we return, we'll jump right back in with Keith Miller as we navigate through grief and loss.
You've been listening to The Coming Out Lounge, a safe space to be you and your truth with coming out coach Rick Clemens. We'll be right back after these messages.
I look into the window of my mind.
Evermore, people have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. These are the words of Dr. Viktor Frankl, the inspiration for the movie Victor and I. That's VIKTOR and imovie.com. And Talk Sense Radio, The Meaning Connection, with host Mary Simaluka and frequent contributor Alexander Vesley. Friday afternoons at 3, 2 Central on TogiNet.com. More and more people today are discarding their quest for money, possessions, and things, and are instead beginning a serious quest to find meaning in life. Until now, these discussions were historically in the hands of priests, ministers, and scribes, then to philosophers, psychiatrists, and psychologists. Now, these deep discussions are where they should be, in the hands of individuals, on the air with you. Talk Sense Radio, The Meaning Connection, with your host, Mary Simaluka, and frequent contributor, Alexander Vesley. Friday afternoons at 3, 2 Central on TogiNet.com.
Friday Nightcap Radio, 10 p.m. to midnight with Christy and Laura on TogiNet.com. Broadcasting from their scrappy kitchen in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. They've got nothing better to do than riff with their favorite Brooklyn-based independent vendors, artists, bands, bartenders, foodies, weirdos, and news stories. Featuring the live studio audience. Betty Rehab and the Gay Boys. Sex and dating commentary with The Impersonals. The Unknown Political Masked Man. And people who kind of know stuff. Stream on after your long week. Brooklyn's variety show of madcap intellectualism. Friday Nightcap Radio with Laura and Christy, 10 to midnight Eastern on TogiNet.com. Radio like you've never seen.
Welcome back to the Coming Out Lounge with your host, Rick Clemens.
And we are back live with my good friend Keith Miller, who's a grief and loss coach. And before we move on, I just want to give everyone a preview of next week's show. I am bringing back one of my favorite guests, Denise LaFrance. She's another coming out coach who specifically works with women who are coming out of the closet. And like me, she came out of the closet very late in life. And we're coming back not to repeat the whole late bloomers show, but we're going to come from another angle that hasn't been addressed. We're going to have a whole show about what it's like to be gay and lesbian parents, the ins and outs of coming out to your children, raising children in a gay and lesbian household, and finding the true authenticity to just be who you are as a parent. So back to Keith, and I think that's a really good segue into, let's talk about this piece of us that at a very cellular level ingrains a grief and loss right out the gate as we come out. I think one of the inherent feelings we have is immediately, even the moment we think about coming out, we begin to experience grief and loss.
Totally. We're all raised in a society currently that has said it's not okay to be gay.
Right.
So when you even contemplate that that's my authentic draw is to another woman and to another male, that you start experiencing that this loss and grief of who I'm supposed to be versus who I am, and how do you navigate that? And so as I remember my own experience coming out, that I felt a lot of shame and guilt that took a long time to navigate through. And in that grief, it could be so overpowering that that this is why the rate of suicide within that demographic is so high, because it's such a difficult thing to face that loss of who I think I'm supposed to be versus who am I?
Well, and I think part of it comes from, and I was just I'm reading a book called The Mandala of Being, and one of the phrases last night, which is kind of a big phrase, but I'm going to share it anyway. It's as if we grow up in a space where it's like we're sanctioned into an indoctrination of a form of insanity. Mm-hmm. Even though it's a big phrase, what it's really saying is we're just truly invited to be in a place of insanity, because this is how we do it. And so suddenly when we step into our authentic selves, or have that first moment, whether it's that stirring or that sexual energy shows up or that little stolen glance for the first time, whenever that happens for us at another individual of the same sex, suddenly all we hear is, this is insane.
Yeah. Well, it is insane when we're told who we are and who we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Says who? And this is something that, all gay individuals face. That's why being really a mentor-type program would be, so wonderful. And really what I, would hope that if for your listeners who are on who are coming out, to connect with somebody and to make sure that they're, expressed, and that somebody could assist them through that coming out process, that it is normal and understandable to feel and to experience that you don't fit in, and to feel some pain around that.
Absolutely. And that's the starting point of my coaching is, resetting our mindset around beliefs.
Exactly.
Because without that, and again, I'm going to bring the grief and loss into that, it can be a very big thing, and I'll use one of the most common ones. It can be a very big thing to shift your religious beliefs around homosexuality in order to embrace your truth. And in that moment that shift is occurring, allowing the grief around, I'm going to release this particular religious belief so that I can make room for a new enlightened belief of self, while incorporating my spirituality, religion, whatever it is, if you don't allow that grief to pass, that I no longer believe I'm going to hell because of who I am. However, what I do believe is my being, my God, my whatever it is, wants me in this world for a purpose. The allowing of letting the old go and the new come in is exactly what we're talking about in today's show, is allowing that grief, that loss to occur, be in it, so that you can blossom into that new gift. And I think that's where many gays and lesbians, I know you did, part of your story is getting hung up in that really tricky space.
Yeah. And when you're in that resistance, you're going to have a tremendous amount of pain. And when we start looking and being in the state of allowing that and saying, this is the way that it is, that's when we start opening the space, saying, how could I honor that loss, of who I thought I was going to be. I remember that experience going, well, this is going to be my experience if I'm going to live an authentic life. Mm-hmm. This is who I'm going to be, and that all those thoughts and beliefs of who I was told or watched on TV, who I thought I was going to be, and what life was going to look like, that all changed. It all changed, and although I was enthusiastic about my future and being with another man and enjoying that experience, there was that process of loss,
right?
And fitting in. We're all raised in an environment where it's a homophobic environment. So only because we come out, how are we supposed to be good with it? We're raised in it. We're just like a straight person who judges others because we were raised in that judgmental experience. And I don't think most straight people really understand that. Only because you come out, that doesn't mean that you still have that inner struggle with it.
Right. It's very much, it's just always there. My favorite phrase is, because as you know, and as I've shared with my listeners before, I'm a father. I have 2 children. Every school year, I come out in some way, shape, or form, because depending on how integrated I am into the school community, there's always an opportunity that I come out. And the inner battle at times can be strong, and other times I allow myself to just authentically be me. But because we haven't been trained and learned behavior on how to be gay or lesbian, it's always going to be present. Even as strong as we get, even as I'm approaching my own 50-year-old mark, I can't say that I've kicked this thing completely, to the curb. There's always going to be a little piece that will show up.
But notice that the more work that you and I and your listeners do, the more conscious we are, the more we lean into it, that the power of the pain, it dissipates, that the experience gets easier. But if we bury it and just throw it into the red flyer, you're right. It will, like if it was on a 1 or 10, it will stay at that intense level 10.
Yeah.
But notice that each year at the school, it's easier for you.
Absolutely. And that's really good advice for anything, whether you're coming out of the closet or you're getting through anything. The power of the pain will go away the more you just, as you so beautifully say, lean into it. And I'd like to add to that, and be with it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It sounds like trite to some people, I'm sure, but when you allow yourself to open the beautiful windows of thought that we've each been given, and that beautiful power of choice, mm-hmm. when you allow the pain to step aside, then you can begin to embrace the beauty of, yes, this experience has been brought to me for a purpose, and look at the gift I'm going to receive from going through this doorway.
So, Rick, that opens up this, conversation of what if everything that I experience and everything that life is providing for me is unfolding in my best interest, and my job is to see how it is versus judging the experiences.
Mm-hmm. It's a really powerful thought. I mean, I think and believe and have seen it manifest in my life, in my client's life, in my family, children, friends' life. Judgment becomes the driving force behind many perceptions, beliefs, and thoughts, assumptions, interpretations, whatever you want to call it, even our little gremlins that show up, because judgment drives everything. And we've got just a couple of minutes before we go to break, but I think that's a beautiful way to begin to really show how sitting in grief and loss, when we manage the judgment around that, is how we can truly be in our own power. So we've got like 1 minute before we go to break, Keith. I guess the question would really be, and we'll start it and then we'll go into the next segment about it, but the question I would have is, how do we, as human beings, in our own personal power, take judgment, release the judgment around the experience, and as you so beautifully said, step fully into the break.
You've been listening to The Coming Out Lounge, a safe space to be you and your truth with coming out coach Rick Clemens. We'll be right back after these messages.
I look into the window of my mind.
Wondering how to market, where to invest, where to advertise, where to find the right advice, or what to do about taxes? Doing business today is a complex venture, and that's where All Biz Talk comes in. All Biz Talk helps businesses and individuals find the right path to their success and learn more about the ideas, products, and services used by today's top professionals. Success leaves clues, so if you want to be successful, it's always best to listen to the people who have already been where you want to be. Our hosts are unbiased and will ask the hard questions, taking your calls to help connect you with the right professionals, people who can help you get a better handle on your personal and business choices. All Biz Talk is not a financial services company and does not offer any financial advice, but we will help you make the right choice when it comes to planning your financial future. Join All Biz Talk Tuesday afternoons at 1 Pacific, 3 Central at allbiztalk.com.
What's ideal for you? Really, what's ideal for you? Being who you are, doing what you love, and getting out and about with friends. What's ideal for you? With your host, Janice Christopher, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Central here on the Rockstar Radio Network. And it all starts with Janice doing just that. Then being open, curious, authentic, and living her life on a quest to discover everything that could possibly make life ideal. Check out the website, whatsidealforyou.com. Studies have shown that 80% of Americans, and probably everyone else too, dislike their work. 80%. The mission then is to turn that passion statistic around, to show how it is possible to live your passions and make a living, or live your passions so that you'll be able to mush through your job until you can change it and watch life's magic begin to happen. It's What's Ideal for You with your host, Janice Christopher, Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. Central on the Rockstar Radio Network.
Welcome back to the Coming Out Lounge with your host, Rick Clemens.
And as we go into the final segment of this show where we've been discussing grief and loss and how to manage it, one of the things that Keith and I were just discussing prior to this last break was this piece of judgment that shows up. And it shows up in every one of us as a human being. It's just part of our human nature to be in judgment. But I'd really like Keith to kind of like just really take the step and talk a little bit about how judgment, even in the grief or loss phase of living, when turned on its head and asked to leave the room, can really be the launching pad for moving through anything that shows up as grief or loss in our life.
Exactly. And you and I were talking about, that came up from looking at, what if life is unfolding in our best interest? And what stops us from really noticing that is our profound way of judging. And the truth is that we've been trained to judge. And when I talk about judgment, Rick, I'm not talking about judgment about should I go down the dark alley or should I make a right or a left here when we're driving. I'm talking about when we judge things as right or wrong, good or bad. So this should happen. That's when we experience kind of joy. And when we say, oh, this shouldn't happen, and we're in that state of resistance, then we experience pain. So the way that we can start navigating away from judgment is to start noticing how much we do judge and what experience we're actually bringing into our lives. So when we have loss and pain, we tend to instantly default to judgment. We ask ourselves things like, so what have I done to deserve something like this? As if something horrible is happening to me in a judgment way versus just noticing something painful is happening to me. Relationships change. Our health changes. The world changes. Our finances change. We always go through change. Life is supposed to change. If we're not changing, then things are disintegrating.
Absolutely.
So change is important. So the first step there, Rick, is to notice in fact, I invite you and myself and all our listeners today to, where am I judging? We do it so much we don't even realize it. So the first step when you're in loss is to start noticing, what am I judging here? And how could I have a more compassionate approach to myself?
Well, I think that's really valuable to see that piece because, it does instigate the rest of the tape and it starts the rest of the script. The judgment sets everything up, and for those of you who've never really consciously tried to go through grief or loss, I think one of the first steps, and I know Keith knows this as in the professional stuff that he does, the 5 stages of grief or loss, from Dr. Kubler-Ross are very simple: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Very simple. And each one of those is what we need. But if you notice, the first one was denial. Well, in denial, judgment reigns supreme. It's just one of those things that shows up. This can't be happening. Why is it? All of these things are judgment statements. And until you can get past the judgment, there's no room to be in the embracing arms of learning from the experience and realizing it is truly part of the journey.
That's why it's so important to work with somebody and to try something new and try something different.
Absolutely.
When we're experiencing loss, rather than, we have this choice, like I mentioned to you when I had that relationship suddenly, and I thought there's got to be a different way of doing this. And I knew I couldn't do it by myself.
Right.
I thought, and it really was a life-changing event to do that. It's hard, given that we were modeled a certain way of grieving and that we do tend to isolate. We have to actually make a conscious choice to say, I'm going to try it differently.
So why do you think many people would shy away from stepping into this kind of help and assistance?
That's a great question. Let me put it this way. People more and more are leaning into and saying, I'm no longer willing to wait and to make the meaning out of this that I'm defective or I'm a victim, and people are going to coaches and they are getting the assistance. They are. So there has been a profound shift in that people are no longer willing to live in pain. People want to experience more pleasure. But to answer your question, I think that people, they tend to believe that it is the way that it is.
Right.
And some people think that, it's an expensive adventure, and it's not. Even one session with a grief coach can have a profound impact and perspective shift. And on the bottom of my signature, it says, whatever you believe, you will experience.
Absolutely.
Life's not happening to us, but we think it is. It's happening from us. We're actually creating our experience.
I love that. Life is happening from us. And I think so many times we want to say life is happening to us. Well,
and how do I manage it?
Yeah. And I think we miss that piece that we do, regardless of what you believe, something has given us this beautiful power of choice. And each moment when we wake up in the morning, we have that power of choice fully, readily, and available at our disposal in a nanosecond. Mm-hmm. And this is where, going back to what you shared, 5 to 8 years of navigating through a loss, or standing at choice and saying, there is no shame, there is no weakness of going to someone who specializes in this kind of work to help me navigate grief and loss, so that potentially in a matter of weeks, months, maybe less than a year, depending on your own personal way of navigating stuff, you could be through that experience as well as embracing and enjoying and living more fully as your intended self.
Exactly. And, there's a lot of testimonials on my website, which is keithmillercoaching.com. But even through my own experience from being in this work and having the repetition of beliefs that do support me, I had this little experience. I was driving the car, and I was with my partner, and someone crossed the median and really hit us almost like a head-on accident. And I got out of the car, and my partner was fine, I was fine, and I walked over to the other driver, and he was fine, and he was very apologetic. And I noticed that I wasn't reactive. And when I turned towards my car and I saw it all smashed up, I thought, what is the opportunity in this? And I was really taken aback about how I was naturally and organically able to not feel victimized by doing this work, and to really start looking at how is life unfolding in my best interest. Now, I didn't know it in that moment, how it was, but it ended up being in my best interest. We don't know how the life events are supporting our success story and our best future, but they are.
Yep.
And when we embrace that belief, we start receiving the gifts and start really being able to create the reality that we do want.
Well, and I think there's power in what you just said, because this best interest concept is so more opening to us in our thought process, gives us some vulnerability to just experience. If it's not in my best interest, at least I've said I'm open to understanding why it's not. But most times we want to create what's in our best interest instead of receiving what's in our best interest and moving through it. And pain, suffering, trauma sometimes is, I'm going to take sometimes even out of it, it's all in our best interest. We just can't see clearly through the lens at that moment.
Exactly. And listen, and it hurts.
Yep.
It hurts. It hurts at a deep, deep level. Even when we could notice that this might be in my best interest, we still might be laying in bed crying over that relationship ending. I get it. I'm not saying that we're not to experience pain. What I'm saying is that pain is necessary for us to know what joy is. This polarity, to have the experience of love and loss, helps us really embrace all the love that life offers us. We need that contrast.
Yeah, we need contrast. I think that's beautiful. So one of the questions I always ask my guests, and before we get to the end, I want to make sure everyone clearly heard Keith's web address. It's www.keithmiller.com. And
KeithMillerCoaching.com.
I'm sorry, KeithMillerCoaching.com. And I just want to make sure you get that. If you're in any kind of form of grief or loss, touch base with Keith. He is just so powerful. He is, as you've experienced through the show today, just very centered, very supportive in his approach. But one of the questions I always ask Keith is, being a gay man yourself and having come through the closet door and doing the work that you do, in these last 2 minutes that we have, what would be your best advice to anyone who's navigating the grief and loss of coming through the closet door?
keep on stepping on. Know that even though something might be painful in this moment, that pain is not something to resist. It doesn't mean that something bad is happening. And to know that tomorrow will be a different day. In other words, stay in the game. That's one of the main things, is to just stay in the game and keep stepping forward. Be authentic. Be transparent. Be vulnerable. Don't protect yourself. There's nothing to protect yourself from. You're okay the way that you are. One of the biggest things that you can do to really shift your life is to be grateful for what is. Mm-hmm. Grateful for this experience. So I have myself and everyone in my life and every client wake up doing a gratitude. I'm grateful for another day to experience life. I'm grateful for this challenge. I'm grateful for a roof over my head, water, eyesight, smell, taste, the love that I have, the safety that I have.
Absolutely. And I think that's a beautiful place to wind up the hour with my good friend Keith Miller from Keith Miller Coaching, is to be grateful, transparent, and to just keep on stepping on. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Keith, for being here.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Absolutely. And everyone,
have
a great week. Love you too. And don't forget to step out, step up, and step into living your powerful truth each and every moment of your life.
Thank you for joining us today with the Coming Out Lounge with your host, Rick Clemens. Make sure you tune in with us next week, same time, same place, for the Coming Out Lounge.